So it is my privilege in this video to introduce you, if you are not familiar with Jake Bro. Most of you are familiar with Jake Bro. When I ask my community, who would you like me to talk to, his name comes up. It's on top of the list. For those of you who are not familiar with Jake Bro, you're in for a treat. I now have 2 pages of questions for him. I don't know how many we're going to get through, but Jake is clearly one of the leaders within this UA tuber kind of community, and it's a privilege to have you here, Jake. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Darren.
So the first thing I want to do is, for those of you, those in the audience who don't know who you are, give them a little bit about your background militarily and educationally.
Education, I'm from Wisconsin, so I went to the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, and I studied geology and political science.
Mhm.
Then I decided not to use my degree, and I went to South Korea to teach English. I had a friend who was already over there. I graduated college in 2008, the great financial crisis. Kind of tough to find a job in America, so I decided to give teaching English a shot. Absolutely loved my time living in South Korea, my time abroad. I spent 6 years there.
Mhm.
But when I turned 30, I had to decide, am I an ESL teacher the rest of my life, or do I want to do something different?
Mhm.
So there were some other things I was looking at, but I was strongly considering applying to the State Department to be a foreign service officer. I applied, didn't get it, but I noticed on the application, if you're a veteran, you get extra points on your candidate profile score.
Mhm.
That got me the idea of commissioning as an officer through officer training school.
Mhm.
So at age 32, I became a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. 10-week training. I became a nuclear missile operations officer. Went to Vandenberg, trained there for 6 months. Then I spent over 4 years in Minot, North Dakota, where I was a launch officer. So I was in charge of the maintenance, security, and operations for the Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile system. That's the land leg of the nuclear triad,
Mhm.
operated by the Air Force. Fast forward, February of 2022, I separate from the military,
That
separate
was my
from the
next
Air
question.
Force.
In February 2022, so you just got out just before
My
this
official
happened.
separation date, I mean, I was taking terminal leave, so I wasn't working those last like 45 days. But yes, the week I officially separated
Wow.
was the week that Russia launched the full scale invasion. I already had a YouTube with about 80,000 subscribers. I was talking about finance and investing content. I made a one off video just because this was the number one news story in the world,
Mhm.
giving my opinions and thoughts as a veteran. This video got 3 times my normal views.
Mhm.
So I made another one, made another one. I was doing like one a week,
Mhm.
trying to both have my normal investing content plus just discussing what was happening in the news. And within 2 months, my channel doubled. It took
Mhm.
me 3 years to get to 80,000 subscribers, and I was at 160,000 within another 2 months. So I realized that this was the important topic, this was the important story. I should be focusing all of my efforts on this. I apologize to my pre-war subscribers that followed me for finance and investing content, but I said, as long as this war is going on, I need to devote all my time and effort to this. Someday, when this war is over and Ukraine is
Mhm.
secure and safe, I can go back to talking about, the markets and Apple's quarterly earnings report or whatever, but I
Right.
can't with a
I
serious
I
I
totally
can't with a
understand. I was
serious
doing
face make videos about that when I could be talking about what Ukraine needs for help right now.
I totally understand. I was doing these leadership videos that nobody watched except for me, or if I inflicted it on my class because I'm a management professor and this is my subject matter. I wasn't really worried about monetizing. I was just thinking about things that I found interesting. And then the war happened, and all I wanted to talk about was this because this is important. And so I, made that shift as well. Um, I didn't see it coming though. I'm curious if you did. Like, I remember sitting around the cafeteria with my professor buddies saying, Putin's just saber rattling. It's not going to do anything. He hasn't done anything before. And then I'm at an academic conference a week later and I'm seeing on the news like, whoa, he just invaded Ukraine. What just happened? Did you see it coming? Or what was that experience like for you?
No, I did not see it coming. And I actually have this secret guilt inside of me
Hmm.
because when I was over a 4-year period, I spent over 300 days underground in a nuclear launch control capsule. And I remember, this is 2018, 2019, sitting down there saying, why are we doing this? Why are we maintaining all of these land based ICBMs when Russia's not going to do anything? I was firmly convinced that my job was pointless. Uh, Nuclear deterrence is important, but between the bombers and the submarines, that's good enough. Why do we need 450 silos out in
Hmm.
Montana, North Dakota, Colorado, and Nebraska? So, in the entire career field, we know why we're there. There's only one other country in the world that has
Hmm.
thousands of nuclear weapons. And my logic was Putin and the oligarchs are getting rich. They're all getting rich. They threw off the shackles of communism and they unleashed crony capitalism and they're making money selling their oil and gas to the West. Why would they ruin that for themselves by starting a completely unnecessary war? Logically, what Putin did doesn't make sense unless Putin genuinely believed it would be a 3-day special military operation.
Hmm.
I remember in that first week or two, the Russian soldiers coming down from the Belarus border to take Kyiv.
Hmm.
They didn't know where they were. Nobody briefed them that they were going into Ukraine. And they didn't bring any winter clothes. They didn't bring their winter cold weather gear. But they brought their dress uniforms
Hmm.
because they were told there was going to be a parade and they would be marching in the parade after they took Kyiv in a week.
Well, apparently they held it tight to the vest, right? So they like Putin and a very small inner circle knew about what was going on, but that was it. So those people doing those operations in Belarus didn't know until the 11th hour that they were actually going in. And so it was a surprise to everyone. But yes, they thought it was going to be over in no time flat. Sure.
But somebody in that inner circle is taking money from the CIA and they leaked the information. Like the United States was screaming, this is
Hmm.
actually going to happen. The State Department said a week in advance, if you're an American citizen, you got to get out. Russia's actually going to do it. And I don't know why people keep, with the Crocus City Hall attack, this terrorist attack. At this point, if the State Department issues an advisory, I'm taking it serious. I
Yeah.
take it as fact now because the intelligence gathering the last 2 years has been so spot on.
You can't find a lot of information about Ukraine on mainstream channels. You can pretty much only find it on YouTube, right? You're one of the most trusted voices out there. When I ask my audience about it, like who do you trust the most? Again, you pop up to the top of the list. You feel that as a responsibility, or do you feel that as a burden, or how do you experience that? Because you actually are one of the go-to trusted voices.
You're right in that it is an experience. And in my mind, I keep thinking, is there no one better that could be doing this? Like, I'm just a very average person. I'm sorry, from the Midwest. And I watched my videos from 2 years ago and they were pretty rough. I think I have gotten better and been more focused and clear in the last year or so of making these videos. But I just know there's so many other people with more experience, more, they speak Russian, for example,
Hmm.
uh, time in government service,
Hmm.
but they're not putting themselves out there.
Hmm.
They're not making daily videos. The cost of production has gone down to near zero.
Hmm.
Uh, do you watch Peter Zion?
Sure. Yeah.
The dude is always hiking and camping, and he
Yeah.
just pulls out his iPhone, films a 4 or 5 minute video. He's got a USB mic on his iPhone, but then he just uploads it somewhere, and he has an assistant posting it to YouTube. It's that easy. And I don't understand why more people with, once again, the background, experience, training, whatever, aren't just broadcasting themselves, having these dialogues, because this is
Mhm.
what people need. People who
So
are confused or scared, they're looking for authorities that can give them good information. I'm just trying to live up to everybody's expectations.
so do you feel like imposter syndrome in that?
But here's the weird thing. If you want to be an authority on something, all you have to do is do it for a long time.
Mhm.
Malcolm Gladwell, How to Become a Master at Something, it's just practice and time.
Yep.
And I wasn't that guy 2 years ago, but I am the guy now.
Mhm.
I've made close to 500 videos in support of Ukraine. I now, amongst Americans, am in probably the top 0.1% with knowledge on this conflict, the
Mhm.
geography, the history. I read books to make myself more competent and informed. But yeah, I do
So
have a
the
little bit
reason
of
I
the
asked
imposter
that,
syndrome.
yeah,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
The reason I asked that is because Jonathan Fink and I had this conversation about he's feeling imposter syndrome, and I was telling him the research is you only feel it if you actually know stuff. So that's how it works. Like the people that don't know how little they don't feel imposter syndrome. So if you do feel it, that's a good sign. That's a healthy sign based on the research. So do you see yourself like more of a journalist or commentator or what? Like
I'm
I'm
a
an academic,
commentator.
a commentator.
I,
Okay.
I would never call myself a journalist because I don't feel like I'm the primary source on my information. I wish I had contacts on the ground and people with insider knowledge feeding me
Mhm.
information and I could give these journalistic firsthand reports, but no, I'm collecting, I'm aggregating from other sources and then trying to tell a story, trying to there's so much stuff being posted and I think most of it
Oh,
is not necessary. It's not helpful. Uh, my videos are long, 20 to 30 minutes, but I'm constantly cutting stuff. Like when I'm doing my research, I just say to myself, I don't have time for this, like this weird turtle tank, going down this field that went viral this week. I didn't mention it because I'm like, is this big picture what people need to know? So
mhm.
I try to keep things big, and I have to aggregate and condense as much as I can. And going back to last year, I had this concern: what if there's nothing to talk about? How do I make a video every other day? And what if nothing happens? And now, after 2 years, I know that's a stupid idea because there's
Mhm.
always something
Usually
crazy
it's the
happening.
opposite. There's too many things going on simultaneously. Yeah, that's right. So I, I'm not sure that I know exactly what your lane is because you seem to be good at political, economic, military, internet. You seem to be comfortable in all these lanes. Like I don't try to pretend that I'm military. I'm really not. I had 2 years of Army ROTC, and then President Clinton killed my program and said thanks for coming, and that was the end for me. That's as far as I got. So I don't do that. I try to stay with more political and here's what's going on in that kind of lane. Where are you? How do you see yourself?
Uh, I'm a weird individual in that I love to learn about anything. And uh, I was undeclared in college my first 2 years because I couldn't pick just one thing. How can you pick just one thing when you like everything?
Okay.
And I was the nerd in college and high school, the kid who always had his hand up wanting to answer all the questions because I knew them. And I settled on geology because it was kind of like this catch-all of all the sciences. Geology is a mixture of biology, the history of the evolution of life, evident in the fossil record.
Hmm.
It's chemistry, it's physics, it's even astronomy when you think about the planets and the formation and the history of our solar system and the universe. So it just captivated me as this catch-all to learn a lot about everything. The same is true for political science. Political science is a mixture of economics, history, anthropology, like sociology. So I gravitated towards political science in college just because I felt like I was learning so much about everything else as far as the social sciences. So yeah, I just make it my personal responsibility because I enjoy learning to learn as much about everything as I can. And if I can break down concepts, simplify them, and help people understand, that only makes me happy.
Okay. You do cover all these different things, and you seem to do them pretty well. So that's why I was asking, like, where do you see? But you just, maybe it's the international experience out of college that has helped broaden you some before the military experience, which was a broadening exercise. I think some of those things were probably what made you comfortable talking about international things more. So, like, I know how far I can go into dissecting what's going on in Europe. Right? I can only go but so far. So speaking of that, okay, Russia has a GDP just north of Italy, and yet here we are. Like, what do you make of that? I mean, if the Soviets didn't have, or if the Russians didn't have a Soviet stockpile of nuclear weapons, this would be game over, good night, right? I mean, that's where we are. You talked about nukes earlier. Well, you see any way that Putin ever decides to use nukes, or is it just like just can't? The threat is stronger than the use.
I made a video a year and a half ago explaining why Putin will never use a nuclear weapon. I mean, unless a NATO ground forces are advancing towards Moscow, Putin's not going to use a nuclear weapon. I can give you the minute summary, the highlights, but basically the reason why Putin is still in power, why nobody is trying in the West trying to assassinate him, is because he hasn't used nukes.
Mhm.
He is a rational actor who refuses to use nuclear weapons. Therefore, Western governments want him to stay in power. If Prigozhin and Dmitry Ukin had been successful in their thunder run to Moscow, would Prigozhin or Dmitry Ukin want to use Russia's nukes if they got control of the Kremlin?
Mm.
So that's the nightmare scenario. So if Putin used a nuke, well, I'm sorry, there's no protection anymore. He would have to find his favorite command bunker underground and stay there for the rest of his life. Because if he ever came up to the surface for fresh air, a Hellfire missile would be waiting for him.
Yeah.
So that's the number one reason. The number two reason is China and India have told the Russians don't do it. And if Russia were to use a nuke out of convenience in their war of aggression, well, what if India and China decide to participate in sanctions? That's game over for Russia.
That's game over economically. Yeah.
So it's their strategy on Kremlin state TV to saber rattle. Solyov loves talking about nuking Berlin and nuking Paris and nuking London, but they're not actually going to do it unless there is a real threat to the core of the government.
Okay. So
But why is Russia not collapsing when they have the GDP of Spain? Well, it's because Russia is food independent and energy independent. They don't have to import these, and those are usually the two factors that
mhm.
famine or going bankrupt from importing energy. So that's why Russia is so resilient despite all these sanctions. Uh, but Russia is running on their reserves of everything. Putin saved up $600 billion to fight
Mhm.
these wars. That's actually not true. The 600 billion was not to fight these wars. That was the wealth fund to make sure the pension system in Russia remained solvent for the next 20 years
Right. But
under severe sanctions.
yeah.
So Putin saved up all this money. The war was supposed to be 3 days, a special limited military operation. Sanctions were going to come, and this wealth fund was going to help Putin live out the rest of his life in power so that Russia didn't collapse. But now half that money was frozen
Mhm.
because Putin was dumb enough not to tell his financial advisors he was going to do this. Otherwise, they would have pulled the money out of Western banks. And now he's exhausting this 300 billion fighting the war. What happens when that money is gone? They're going to
Big.
print
Yeah. They're
hyperinflation.
going to have hyper. Yeah. I can't see any other way out. I mean, they could try to pump out more oil, but that's problematic in its own way of getting out. Let alone the oil refineries being hit. For the first year, we thought oh, Putin just wants an off ramp. Putin just wants an off ramp. How many times do we hear the word off ramp? And probably more in 2022 than the rest of my life combined that I hear that word, right? Was that our assumptions, or was
Well,
that
I'm
legit?
convinced at this point that Putin was telling his negotiators who were talking to people in the West, this is maybe what Putin wants. Hold off sending tanks or jets or long range missiles to Ukraine because maybe we can once again have an off ramp. At this point in 2022, I'm not putting it past the Russians that they were signaling that this is what they wanted when in reality Putin never wanted that.
Hmm.
I'm sure the oligarchs wanted an off ramp.
Hmm.
They were getting rich off of the normal level of corruption within Russia.
Hmm.
Uh, this has been a net loss. Yes, when you look at magazines talking about the wealth of Russia's wealthiest individuals, they are getting richer because Putin is depleting this wealth reserve fund. But when that money's gone, uh,
Yeah.
inflation's going to eat away at their total net worth. Uh, so the off ramp, I think, was a distraction, wishful thinking from Western
Yeah.
politicians. But Putin's all in. He's
Yeah,
he's
that's why
he's
I was asking the
willing.
question, because we thought, like, we were thinking with an American or Western mindset about how, well, of course they don't want to do this, of course they don't want to do that, but I think they just want to do it. And
I think Putin, the first couple months, was genuinely concerned that uh, his inner circle might try to remove him, or there might be a popular uprising in response to all these soldiers being butchered in an unnecessary war. But no, I think the guys, when you're already the wealthiest man in the world and dictator for life of Russia,
mhm,
what else is there?
it's
And
making a name,
to be
right?
remembered by history, I forget which article declared that Genghis Khan was the person of the millennia for the 1000s.
Hmm.
Well, how do you get that title in this millennia? And Putin wanted to be cemented in history as the longest ruling, greatest ruler of Russia. He wanted statues of himself in every town square 100 years from now. So yeah, he had to go to war, and Ukraine was uh, the biggest obstacle, 40 million people. But if Russia had quickly taken Ukraine, Russified the people, conscripted their men to join the military, and then go to the next country, the Baltics, Poland, Finland, Central Asian republics.
Okay, so let's shift gears. Let's talk American politics, which I know is your favorite subject. Now, I'm a Reagan Republican. I'm still a Republican, but I am not a MAGA Republican by any stretch of the imagination.
Did
That's there's like I have an allergic a reaction to what Trump is doing here, and
did you see? Did you see this morning that Donald Trump declared Ronald Reagan was a Democrat?
my gosh.
So anybody who voted for Ronald Reagan, surprise, you're actually a Democrat. You're not a real Republican.
Okay, so how do you interpret Trump? Like I see him as a virus within the party. Like there's a significant problem where it's metastasizing. 2016 there was even a different Trump. Then there's a 2024 Trump where at least there was a, like, let's go after ISIS kind of something. And here there's a something very weird, different about Ukraine. And like, how do you process this? What is how does Trump have the staying power from the way you see it?
Trump is an avatar for people's hate and rage.
That's
And
actually good.
people's hate and rage has been magnified, well, for decades, really. Uh, I don't know if you remember listening to Rush Limbaugh on the radio in the
Sure.
90s. Whenever I'd visit my grandma and grandpa, for some reason, Rush Limbaugh was always on. And they were always listening to this drip feed of hate, hate, hate against this group or that group. Uh, and that's not my personal brand because I want to try and find a way to make the world better. But for a lot of conservatives, they just want the world not to change. And this term woke or wokeism, Trump loves this term because it's ambiguous. Whatever you want it to mean, that's what it means. Do you hate feminists? That's woke. Vote for Trump. Do you hate environmentalists? That's woke. Vote for Trump. Do you hate gays, lesbians, and trans people? That's woke. Vote for Trump. Do you hate migrant workers or immigration? That's woke. Vote for Trump. There's all these different issues that some people are very upset about. It could be legitimate or not. Doesn't matter. Trump speaks in ambiguity to be this projection. He wants you to say, I'm your champion. You hate this group? Well, I'm going to suppress that group, destroy that group. I mean, now he openly talks about imprisoning people that oppose him. And I do. There's natural causes for this in human nature. People don't like change. The older you get, the harder it is to learn new things. And just with technology, I'm sorry, but the world's going to keep changing rapidly. So I try to, as personal philosophy, embrace it. When I get on a website and there's some new system or some new thing, I'm like, great, I have to learn this now. But I try to embrace it because the people who don't adapt fall behind. That's just the way it is in life. And people who don't accept that are at a disadvantage. So Trump is a reaction to this. The more people hate him, the more environmentalists hate him, the more feminists hate him, the more, whoever hates him, the more his supporters love him.
Yep, that's exactly right. You're spot on.
It's a, Newton's second law or whatever. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction.
Right.
So Trump loves the attention. He loves the negative press because he knows it amplifies him amongst his supporters.
Right.
The only question is, by November, does he have enough supporters to win a general election? My argument and belief is no, because I don't think his political coalition is big enough, especially when he continues alienating and purging Republicans for whatever reason. And Biden's just trying to be vanilla neutral in everything. Biden just wants to stand there and say, I'm not Trump, vote for me.
So
and it's going to work.
What you identified is there's a lot of truth in that. When he says something that's nuts, it's not a bug, it's a feature. The more nuts he acts, the crazier thing that he says, the more that you can't say that, the more his real hardcore base loves him. Because I think you identified it in a properly. They want to punch the system, and they're just channeling him to do it. And I think there's something very significant there. What do you make of Marjorie Taylor Greene? Does she believe a fraction of what she says, or
yes,
she does?
Here's the thing: we live now in a post-truth world, and to people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, belief is power. If you believe something is true, then that is your truth. And anybody who questions your truth or attacks your truth by presenting facts and evidence, well, those people are now attacking your beliefs because what you believe is your truth. And anyone who attacks your beliefs is a bad person. You can discredit them, you can ignore them, you can attack them. So I do think a lot of Trump supporters live in this alternate reality that makes them feel more comfortable. And they've come to the conclusion that, well, this is what I believe. And if you don't accept what I believe is my truth, you're a bad person, you're the enemy, I'm going to destroy you. And look, there's Russia. They want to help us. They say they're on our side.
And they're defending Christianity.
Yeah.
What? It pains me. I'm an evangelical Christian, right? I'm old school Republican. That evangelical Christians think, and large blocks of them think, that Russia is the defender of the faith. When, like, did you see this thing 2 days ago? The Southern Baptist Convention put out a message to Mike Johnson asking him, put this on the floor. Baptists in Ukraine are being persecuted by Russians, and they're listing all kinds like there's. I want to thank you, one, for making it very clear over time, especially in the last few months. This is MAGA Republicans, not just Republicans writ large, because there's people like me that exist that are fully throatedly supporting Ukraine, and so I appreciate that. But yeah, it's bizarre to watch. Okay, just last thing about Trump. Trump should have a bad week theoretically with Stormy Daniels' trial coming up. I can't see a positive outcome of that, and particularly when you have such a large base that evangelicals, particularly, that should be like, this probably isn't a good look. Like the whole thing just should be turning them away. It won't turn a bunch away, but I can't see a positive outcome for that with Trump. Which leads me to Speaker Johnson and maybe wondering what's coming out to overshadow that this week. What may be coming out in the House, that whether it's Mayorkas coming out, the Mayorkas stupid impeachment, which doesn't have a
Nobody cares
prayer.
about that. That's a dead end. Like, people
Okay.
don't know who that man is.
Okay.
Like,
So
if you ask the average American what's his name, I don't even know his name. This is the
Alejandro
Secretary of
Mayorkas.
Homeland Security,
Yeah.
Mayorkas. I don't know what he looks like. In my mind, I can't picture him. And I pay attention to politics.
Mm-hmm.
So for MAGA to be going after him to politically impeach him, that doesn't do anything, because I don't even know what the guy looks like.
Well, and they don't even have a chance of actually getting a 66, 67 votes in the Senate to actually do it. So that why are you even pursuing this? And to make a point, this is silly. Okay.
Well, they wanted to impeach Biden, so that Trump could say, "Well, we've both been impeached for political reasons. They're all witch hunts or whatever." But they couldn't. They literally found nothing to impeach Biden for, so they decided to impeach this cabinet secretary instead.
That could very well be. So Speaker Johnson has delayed 6 months. You've gone over this pretty clearly in the last few videos. So multiple choice tests. Can he continue to keep going until the next election? That's A. B, a discharge petition. Is that going to happen? C, does he allow a vote on the Senate bill? Or D, does he present some kind of New Deal loan package? What do you think is going to happen?
Think should happen. Wait, think will happen
Think
or
will.
should happen. I desperately have to believe that we can get another 24 signatures on this discharge petition. It's trickling in. Every day there seems to be one or two more Democrat House holdouts signing this petition. The closer we get to 218, the more likely a block of about 20 Republicans will all at the same time on the same day just go sign it. I choose to believe that is the most likely scenario over the next week or month.
Okay.
The second most likely scenario, in my opinion, is more Reagan Republicans just resign from Congress.
That
Ken Buck
happen.
quits, Mike Gallagher quits. There was another guy who quit in January. And the Democrats just take control of the House, by a 1-seat majority, maybe even, by this summer, probably by May or June. And then Hakeem Jeffries can just schedule a vote on the Senate's version of the bill.
Do you think that's a likely scenario, or where do you think that is in the rankings of the probability?
I think we need 3 or 4 more House Republicans to resign. And there's already, I think, like 24 who have announced they're not running for re-election.
Mm-hmm.
So these people not running for re-election, they hate the party. They hate Mike Johnson. They hate Donald Trump. They're miserable.
They are miserable.
And they're already on their way out. If you work at a university, if there's some universities out there that want to offer these people some positions on the condition they start immediately, that would definitely help out our democracy. So I do think there will be more resignations because Ken Buck signaled there would be. He said he's talked to other people, and Mike Johnson shouldn't be worried about his resignation. Mike Johnson should be worried about the next 4 or 5 planning to leave. And with Mike Gallagher, he deliberately timed his resignation at the end of
Mhm.
April so that there wouldn't be a runoff election to replace him prior to November. The seat will just remain vacant through November. So there's other states that probably have similar laws saying that if we're within 6 months of the general, you can't have a special to fill that seat. So I think these resignations from traditional Reagan Republicans fed up with the MAGA movement,
Mhm.
they'll happen after this cutoff where you can't have a special election to fill the seat before the November election.
So that only gets us so far. The election is really what will matter long term going forward. What do you think's happened to our reputation internationally, both with our allies and with our enemies?
Well, on Kremlin State TV, they don't attack America anymore. You know, these
Hmm.
clips from Russia Media Monitor, they talk about nuking Paris and Berlin and London, and they don't have anything bad to say about America anymore
That's interesting.
because Mike Johnson and Trump are their guys. And
Yeah, that's what she said yesterday. Our Mike Johnson.
yeah,
Uh,
no, this is the grand scheme. Uh, Putin and Russia would love it if Trump got involved, and then Trump pulled America out of NATO and ordered every U.S. soldier in Germany or the UK or wherever to leave Europe. Europe belongs to Russia.
Now, I don't know that Putin or that Trump is working for Putin. I know Trump works for Trump because Trump loves Trump. Like we all know that. I don't know where that connection is or how deep that goes or whatever else. So it'll play out over time. Just we'll be able to see more and more as time goes on. Um, so allies are looking at us and they're going, "I thought you had Ukraine's back.
It's
Will you have
incredibly
my back?"
sad. The Prime Minister of Japan
Yep.
came to address a joint session of Congress and rehearsed the speech in English to get the point across. And he said, America has a special place in the world and it needs to continue. The United States killed millions of Japanese people to end their empire.
Mhm.
The Japanese began expanding in 1880. They had, when you count sea territory, the Japanese Empire was the largest empire that ever existed in the history of the world, larger than the Mongols, if you once again count oceanic territory. And the United States firebombed Tokyo, two nuclear bombs. We killed millions of Japanese, and it was, under MacArthur, a military occupation of Japan to get rid of their empire. And here we are in 2024, the Prime Minister of Japan begging us not to abandon this role.
Yep.
Mike Johnson is sitting 3 feet behind him and just.
Uh, I can't understand it myself. I'm flabbergasted. And for all your anger at them, imagine my frustration. This is my party. Like, come on, guys. It's bad. Okay, silver lining though, if there is something like a silver lining, Europe seems to be stepping up in a significant way. What Macron's statements or Peter Pavel from the Czech Republic or others they're seeming to kind of coalesce. Is that fair or are they? I mean, other than Hungary and Slovakia, other than these two countries, they seem to really understand they have to deal with this threat in their backyard more and more as time goes on, realizing, Trump could happen.
How many BMW car factories have been converted to tank factories?
Yeah. Okay. Fair point. I mean, they
Uh,
don't have, they look like,
Russia has declared war on Europe. That's what they say every single day.
Mhm.
And yes, it's nice that the Europeans are increasing their financial aid and donating more equipment. But if one country, let's say Norway, had just said, "We're not going to donate any money. We're just going to build an artillery factory and make 1 million artillery shells a month."
Mhm.
When you think about the production capability of France, Germany, and the UK during World War I and World War II,
Mhm.
None of them are doing enough. Just saying, well, we're going to allocate 5 billion towards Ukraine's reconstruction over the next 12 years. This is what Switzerland announced. There's not going to be a reconstruction if the country falls.
Yeah,
So stop trying to give non-lethal aid. And it'd be nice if they told their factories, you need to make weapons now. Stop making cars, stop making refrigerators. German manufacturing is supposed to be the best in the world, and they're not doing it. You can't wait for the United States to save you, because there is a non-zero chance Trump will be president again.
This week felt very different than previous weeks. You started seeing things like the air defense just getting through, on top of the lack of artillery shells. It seems like the war just got longer this week. It feels like that. I mean, maybe not this week, but within recent days. They're going to the degree that Russia can knock out electricity, it's going to be very, very hard for Ukraine trying to take back ground that they shouldn't have to take back because they're out of artillery position or artillery shells. What do you think about the expansion or the length of the war after recent days? I mean, are you feeling that, or am I just reading things into?
Russia is blowing up hospitals and blowing up power plants because they want the entire country to be a gray zone. They want as many civilians as possible to just leave Ukraine, go to the EU as refugees. But Ukraine's been wanting it both ways. Like they want to still have a functioning, growing economy while 20% of their territory is being occupied and they're being attacked every single night. I don't think it's fair for me to criticize decisions made by Ukraine because they're in an impossible situation. But a good example is this mobilization law and the fact that 18 to 26-year-olds are not capable of being mobilized. They only draft and conscript people older than 26. And the culture in Ukraine, the belief is that, when you're 18 to 26, you're getting married, you're having kids. In order for Ukraine to have a future, young men need to be starting families and doing that. But if Russia takes Ukraine, all of these 18 to 26-year-olds are going to be conscripted into the Russian military at gunpoint, right, and then ordered to attack Poland and the Baltics. So Zelensky says we can't mobilize these people because we need 6 taxpayers to support per one soldier. I can't tell Ukraine what to do, but once again, they need to get more serious about getting as many men into the military as possible and reducing expenses to support all those men. I have to believe that Europe can at least build body armor and uniforms and small arms, but honestly, every grandmother in Ukraine in a small village needs to be given a Kalashnikov and told, when the Russians show up, you know what to do.
Yeah, the 18 to they moved it down from 27 to 25, and that surprised me too. But again, that's kind of like the it's just a cultural thing that I wouldn't have thought from our experience in the United States. World War II, you're 18. My grandfather tried to join when he was 17 in World War I, and my great grandfather went and yanked him out because he was 17. But when he was 18, he would be able to go, and that makes sense in our minds. It's like not having elections during wartime. We had it during the Civil War, but that's part of their constitution, and that's part of the way that they.
Russia is conscripting 18 to 25-year-olds.
I'm sorry?
Russia is conscripting 18 to 25-year-olds. I don't understand why Ukraine would put this limitation on themselves.
I'm wondering if Russia doesn't think they're just going to make it up by stealing the 18 to the population of Ukraine on the back end, but they don't seem to value life in the same way that Ukrainians do either. So okay. I want to shift to economics, and then we'll be a couple economics questions, and then we'll wrap up. Okay. How do we close loopholes with sanctions? Because China is getting a lot of parts in dual use. Kazakhstan, I mean, their dual use parts have gone up by orders of hundreds or thousands of percent. Brazil has been taking a 6,000, I think it was 6,000% more oil from Russia than they had been just a couple years ago. India's absorbing as much oil as they can. What's the remedy for that?
The bad
It's hard,
answer
I
is
know.
there might not be one. Like when it comes to Western components, chips that go into these Russian missiles, yes, companies in the G7 are not selling to Russia. But if the Maldives puts in a huge order for some reason, or these Central Asian republics, like if you're a chip maker, you don't you're just trying to make money. You're just
Hmm.
trying to sell your products. So it'll go to Kyrgyzstan or whatever, and
Hmm.
then a Russian plane shows up and picks them up, and they've got to pay maybe a 20% markup. So all we've done with sanctions is make these components more expensive for Russia, which is still helping. It's still
Yeah.
going to bankrupt Russia faster, and it does slow them down. But in a global society, a global world, you can't stop it. I mean, even if even if you cut off that link, another one pops up. Even if we start doing thorough investigations, where does it go after we give it to you? Well, it can just be passed off to another country. We
Sure.
sell to Kyrgyzstan first, these chips. They're then sold to Turkey or wherever. They'll just move around until Russia gets what they want, because Russia is willing to pay any price to any intermediates to get what they want and need. Not a good answer, um, unless you just have a complete export ban to countries outside the G7 or whatever.
Hmm. Yeah,
But
that's a rough answer too.
that'll destroy the profit margins of these private companies, like
Right.
Nvidia or AMD or Intel or whatever, and
Yep.
um,
Okay.
wouldn't be popular.
Let's go channel your old future, past self in your past life before the war. Good time to buy oil stocks.
Probably not
It's
financial advice, but
hits are going to keep coming.
yeah, oil is going to go probably over $100 a barrel by this summer.
So
Big picture economics. Everyone is hoping for and expecting the Federal Reserve in the United States to cut interest rates.
mhm,
The reason why, if you're buying a house, your mortgage is so expensive,
mhm,
your APR on your credit card has gone up, your car loan is more expensive. Uh, the central bank rate determines the prime rate, which
mhm,
banks have to calculate into what they loan out money. The goal of raising interest rates is to get inflation under control. And it's working, but not not perfectly. The year over year inflation, we got the report last week. It's up from last month to 3.5% year over year.
mhm.
Now, there's lots of countries in the world that look at 3.5% and they think it's amazing.
Yeah.
Estonia, has double digit inflation. They've had it for a long time. They would love. Russia has double digit inflation year over year. They would love 3.5. But in America, we just have a higher standard. So I don't think the Fed actually can cut rates.
Yeah, it also
Uh,
depends on where it lands too, right? If it lands on food, you're dealing with something different than if it's landing on something else within that inflation, like how the inflation rate works out. Okay, last couple of questions. What have you learned? The big takeaway from everything that you've been doing as you've been like reading daily. I'm sure you're reading dozens of articles like I am, just trying to understand what's going on. What's your biggest takeaway from what you've learned throughout this time since the war began?
the West is incredibly weak and vulnerable. You know, how much money does Russia allocate to bot farms and
Mm,
their social influence network? And it's really not that many people who support Russia in the West. It's a severe minority, but they're so loud and they're so relentless, and it works. You just blast noise into a general population, and it affects how they feel and it affects what they think. If I were to sit down with any person one on one and talk to them maybe for an hour about what this war is really about, I'll probably be able to convince them. They want to be a good person. They want to do what's right. But
Mhm.
then they log on their computer and they see posts from Elon Musk and David
Mhm.
Sachs and Tucker Carlson saying that Ukraine is murdering Christian priests.
Yeah.
And Russia is the defender of Christianity in the world right now. And with humans, they're just very easily confused. When they get two positions that are opposite and they say, I have no personal experience, I'm just listening to this person and listening to this person,
Mhm.
they tune out, they switch off. And that's a win for Russia. They want you just to tune out, switch off, don't pay attention to all the terrible things they're doing.
Mhm.
So yeah, we need to talk about this. We need to examine this in the West. I want to see regulation of our social media spheres to block Russian and Chinese propaganda, Iranian propaganda. I think ISIS gets their posts taken down. Why don't we take down stuff from the Kremlin? What's the difference between ISIS and the Kremlin at this point?
What did you get wrong? That's a harder question. Like throughout this, like what? Yeah, I missed that one. What did you get wrong?
I assumed that the Russian people weren't that different from the average European or American. Uh, you know, you have Coca Cola and you have McDonald's. Surely you're like me, who cares about personal liberty, individual rights. Nope. The Russians don't care.
Yeah.
Uh, there's so many of them, and I understand Russia's internal security forces are pretty serious. But if the Russian people really wanted to put a stop to this, they could. There are so many points in the system where if you refuse to cooperate, Putin wouldn't be able to conduct these wars. But they really are different. I forget who I was talking to that told me this, but he said it's better if you just see the Russians as being purple. Like they look white, they look European. You want to identify and associate with them simply because how similar they look.
Mhm.
But just imagine they're purple. They're a completely different race of people with different values, different beliefs,
Hmm.
a really messed up history, and they embrace it. They love it. Being
Yeah.
the bullies of the Eurasian continent, centuries of continuous war. Solyov, in one of these clips, I shared this on my channel. Solyov said that the last 30 years of Russia being at peace was an anomaly. War is the natural state of Russia. Centuries of war and expansion to get their empire to the maximum borders of 1918. That was Russia's normal state. That's what Russia's going back to. The people are behind it.
Hmm. Do you have a favorite or preferred charitable cause related to Ukraine, or do you just help here and help there, or what? What like? So I've been working with Greg Terry, trying to propel him as much as possible, and he's working with Pete the medic, and so that's where I spend my time. Do you have something equivalent?
I think the NAFO 69 Sniffing Brigade is pretty amazing with Ragnar Sass. They fundraise for all these trucks. They, you know, fix up what they can fix up, and then they convoy them out to Ukraine. I give money to people that I know. I've given a lot of money to Macer Gifford and Brandon Mitchell, and yeah, you can always donate to United 24. But
Yeah.
I gravitate towards individuals, and I do occasionally recommend and promote them at the end of videos or on the community tab, my YouTube channel.
Okay. Last question. Your banner on your page. It looks like Kurt, uh, um, not Russell, Kurt
Kirk
Douglas.
Douglas.
Is that who that is?
It is who that is. Uh,
Why? I've wondered this for 2 years now.
there's a fantastic movie called Paths of Glory. I
Okay.
think it came out in like 1957 or 1958, and it's a Stanley Kubrick film.
Okay.
So everybody knows Clockwork Orange and uh,
Right.
2001: A Space Odyssey, but this was one of Stanley Kubrick's earlier films, and it's in black and white. And it's on the So Kirk Douglas is a French colonel in
Uh-huh.
World War I. Fantastic movie. You have to watch it. I highly recommend
I'm
it.
going to.
It's a completely underrated and forgotten film, when you think about Stanley Kubrick's masterpieces, but one of his earliest films, in my opinion, related to war. Fantastic movie. You'll really enjoy it.
Okay, so I've been wondering that for 2 years now, so I'm glad I at least got that answered, but beyond all these other great questions, thank you for your time, Jake, I really appreciate it. Is there anything else that you wanna leave as a last thought?
Russia will be defeated. Cosmic justice demands this. They've gotten away with too much for too long, and there's too many fantastic people in the world like you and me. We're never going to stop until Ukraine is safe and secure and the Russians are defeated.
Well, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.